Hello, I'm Gwen Eiffel. Welcome to the Washington Week Webcast Extra. I'm joined around the table by Sue Davis of USA Today, Karen Tumulty of The Washington Post, Jeff Zeleny of ABC News, and Pete Williams of NBC News. Huge barriers to same-sex marriage have been falling from coast to coast in Pennsylvania, Idaho, Arkansas, and Oregon just in the last 2 weeks. That means 19 states plus Washington, D.C. have now deemed gay marriage legal. A pretty rapid turnover, Pete.
Oh, astonishingly rapid. I was talking to a couple of judges this week about whether they've ever seen anything happen this fast, and they say no. And, the two states you mentioned, two of them are on hold, Idaho and Arkansas, on appeal. But in Oregon and Pennsylvania, you've had the governor of both states say, we're not going to appeal this. So that brings it to 19. And in the other states that don't permit same-sex marriage, there's a lawsuit in every state but one, North Dakota. And the lawyer who this week filed a lawsuit in South Dakota says he's trying to find couples in North Dakota, too. So it's just moving astonishingly fast. However, the question is, I think, ultimately, is this going to go to the Supreme Court? And, normally the reason the Supreme Court takes a case is because there's a split among the federal circuits. So far, there's not. It's 12 for 12 in the federal courts. We haven't gotten any appeals court's decisions yet. We've had the arguments in the 10th Circuit for Utah and Oklahoma and the 4th Circuit for Virginia. And so we've gotten the arguments there. And I suppose, it's possible the 5th Circuit Texas case could go the other way. But if it's still like this, the U.S. Supreme Court might say, well, what's for us?
Because the court normally takes split decisions.
Yes, to harmonize the law so that the law isn't different around the country.
But if the people have spoken, the court may just say, not worth the fight?
Yes, but of course then the problem would be, or then the issue would be, depending on how you look at this, that there'd be states still in the country where you haven't had court
recognition.
Right, which don't permit same-sex marriage, and so there would still be a state-to-state variation. Would the Supreme Court feel that they should take the case to eliminate that? I don't know. I think the earliest you'd expect the Supreme Court to have to decide whether to take these cases is next term, perhaps next term or the term after that. But I wouldn't count 100% that this is an issue that's going to be resolved by the U.S. Supreme Court.
That's fascinating. Sue, among all the things we have learned from the revelations from Edward Snowden over the weeks and months is that a lot more of our information was subject to government surveillance than we thought, including bulk collection of phone records. So the House steps in and this week votes to end that, except how much did they do?
Well, it is significant in that this is probably going to be the only congressional response to the Edward Snowden leaks. And there was a lot of questions about what are we going to do? Well, this is it. Essentially what the House bill did is it ended bulk collection, but only to the extent that it would now require the NSA to seek a court order for the phone records and provide a reason to the court as to why they want these specific phone records. So the telephone companies still have to keep all our data. They still have to do that for 18 months, which they have to do already, and that it's just going to have to be more targeted. Now, what civil libertarians say this still isn't good enough is that the bill from what it was introduced has already been significantly weakened. They dropped a provision that would have put a public advocate on the court to monitor their activities.
The
FISA court. They dropped provisions that would have required both annual and biannual reports on exactly how many requests are the government looking for, to give us a sense of what kind of numbers there are. So even some people that's voted for the bill ended up voting for it in the end because it was so weakened from what came out of the committee. Now, Patrick Leahy, who is the Judiciary Chairman on the Senate side, is going to take a look at this bill this summer. He said immediately after the House passed that he was encouraged by it, but he's going to try and get those provisions back in to provide a little bit more comfort. Also, what's notable about it is that originally a lot of the big tech companies, Google, Facebook, Twitter, were on board and had endorsed the bill, and they pulled back on their endorsement the day before they passed it because they think that there's language in the bill that they interpret as leaving a loophole that would allow the government to bulk collect internet data, that they could search your email or they could see what you're doing on your Facebook. And they want language that's going to tighten that to make it very clear that the government can't search your Gmail. And if that's not in there, they're not going to support the bill, which is a very potent factor in all of this, because I think that the government would really like to have those companies on board.
And it's a fight that's never going to go away, it feels like sometimes. I want to ask you, Jeff, today, Friday, at the White House, the president announced what some people are calling a cabinet shakeup. I call it a cabinet shuffle. In comes the mayor of San Antonio, Julian got the right Castro?
Julian
Castro. There's two of them. And over goes Shaun Donovan, who's the Secretary of Housing and Urban Development now, and he's going to become head of the Office of Management and Budget.
I mean, it's definitely a reshuffling. And this is all sort of set off by Kathleen Sebelius deciding that she was going to step down from Health and Human Services. So the budget director moved to her spot. So we're just kind of seeing people move up. Of course, the thing that has us most interested, we always or sometimes like to look at things through a political lens, perhaps.
Really?
And Julian Castro, the mayor of San Antonio, the outgoing mayor of San Antonio, he's a rising star of the Democratic Party without question. He delivered that keynote speech at the Democratic convention. His twin brother is a member of Congress. So by him accepting a job in the federal government in the Obama cabinet, a lot of speculation. Now, he is going to be on the short list for Hillary Clinton's vice presidential nominee, which, of course, is getting ahead of ourselves by a couple different steps. But a lot of speculation or chatter about that. And look, I think it gives him a leg up. He doesn't have that many places to go in his home state of Texas. It's still difficult for a Democrat to run statewide.
I'm trying to remember the last cabinet secretary who became a major national elected official. Figure.
Not became, but could be appointed as such. It broadens him out a little bit. He's 39 years old, so it adds a couple lines to his resume. But we always hear from these cabinet secretaries as they're being sworn in. We'll see the photograph, and unless they get into trouble or something, we don't hear from them again. But he is certainly an interesting figure in Washington, and I would believe that the Castro brothers would be the highest-ranking brothers, twins in the federal government. But if I'm wrong, someone check me on that and send us an email.
I have to say that the biggest dilemma for me is that when we have to pull tape, to videotape, to show which brother is doing which job, we're going to get it wrong. Joaquin and Julian are identical twins.
They may not notice.
Well, one of them wears a congressional pin.
Yeah,
That's how I tell the difference when they're standing next to each other. But after that, it's all bets are off.
But they have done the whole Patty Duke thing on at least one occasion.
What do you mean?
They switched places. One twin was supposed to be at a political event, and the other showed up.
The other showed up.
And nobody noticed.
Yeah, they
admitted it.
Okay, Karen, I want to pick up on something we touched on in the broadcast, but which is really interesting to me, maybe because I live in Washington, D.C., but that of all of the great accomplishments of the Great Society, the one thing that somehow LBJ in his big moment of power was not able to pull off is something that still affects me every day, every time I try to go to vote, which is home rule for the District of Columbia.
And at the time, D.C. was the only major city in the country where a majority of the population was African American. And so LBJ really thought that this was a that these people couldn't elect a mayor and a city council was a real civil rights issue. And so, as Harry Truman did before him, he puts D.C. home rule out there, he lobbies it hard, he gets it through the Senate, it dies in the House in the District of Columbia Committee, which at that point is controlled by conservative Southerners. He tries a discharge petition, a parliamentary move where if he could get half the people in the House to sign a petition, he could get it to the floor. He works it as hard member on member as Joe Califano, his domestic chief, had ever seen him work anything, and he still fell short. So he ends up having to appoint a mayor, appoint a city council, and says, you know, D.C., this is as enfranchised as I can get you.
And eventually we, as in those of us who live here, did get an elected city council, an elected mayor, but still the franchise is limited.
No vote in Congress.
That's so interesting.
Although district residents can vote for president.
We can vote for president eventually. It's true. Right. We sit and wait, and then we come around to it. Thank you. Thank you, everybody else. We could go on, but we won't. Instead, go to pbs.org/WashingtonWeek.org to watch our salute to the final resting place of so many of our nation's veterans, Arlington National Cemetery. That's from our producing station, WETA, here in Washington. And we'll see you next time on the Washington Week Webcast Extra.